Good afternoon, and welcome to today's KEI Network webinar. This, by the way, will be the last in the series. But before introducing today's topic, I'm pleased to announce an important new chapter for the KEI Network. That's for all of us. Beginning this September, only about a week away, we will further integrate our work with Troy Media. Our weekly newsletters, newly titled Perspectives, will be distributed to media organizations throughout Troy's North American media network, so we're extending our reach extensively. So that reach will benefit our contributors with ideas and conversations. Each month, Perspectives will explore a specific theme. So we'll have a theme or a dedication for 1 month, drawing upon articles, not only our own, but some of those published by Troy Media. Also, books written by the KEI Network contributors and associated weekly podcasts. Together, these elements will enrich our content and provide greater continuity between what we read, hear, and discuss. We'll also formulate the KEI Network's membership. We'll formalize it by including subscribers and contributors, while continue to recognize the patrons and donors who support making us an independent newsletter, independent podcasts, and keeping our public conversations possible. These changes will broaden our reach while strengthening the community that has sustained the network. So now about today's webinar, or if you like, our podcast. I'm going to bring that up on the screen. This is the topic for today. Today's discussion offers a fitting bridge to this next stage. This week's newsletter, Paradoxes Prevail, Converging Crisis Pending as a question mark, suggested that chaos may not be the defining feature of our time. Paradox may be. We possess more knowledge, wealth, technology, and global connectivity than any previous generation. Yet the systems generated to make us stronger are also producing new vulnerabilities. For example, global supply chains, achieving extraordinary efficiency but concentrate risk at a few critical points. Military power no longer guarantees control when inexpensive drones and cyber attacks of small groups can be challenged. Their vast superior forces are challenged by minor players. Governments regulate harmful activities while depending upon the revenue they generate, like gambling. Governments also borrow to satisfy present demands, while aging populations leave fewer future workers to repay that debt. Immigration is both necessary and at the same time resisted. Economies need workers and taxpayers, yet rapid population growth can overwhelm housing and healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Innovation increasingly depends upon data, software, intellectual property, skills, and networks. And yet our accounting and regulatory systems remain rooted in an earlier tangible asset economy. That later paradox will be addressed in depth in September. Each decision may appear rational when considered separately, and together, however, they can create systems that are increasingly difficult to sustain or control. Institutions become established to provide stability and yet become resistant to the very evidence demanding change. This brings us to the central question for today's discussion. Do these accumulating contradictions signal a converging crisis, or are they simply the recurring tensions of societies adapting to change? The deeper issue is leadership. If governments, corporations, institutions, and citizens remain focused primarily on today's interests, who speaks for tomorrow? Genuine leadership requires both the vision to recognize where present choices are taking us and the influence to persuade people today to accept decisions whose benefits may lie beyond the next election, budget, quarter, or personal interest. Without such leadership, having the capacity to influence today to think about tomorrow, history suggests that change will still occur, but it may be imposed upon us by a crisis rather than shaped by foresight. With that, let's begin today's conversation. Are we capable of resolving these paradoxes before they converge into crisis? I know we've got a paradox on the relationship between two nations, one of which we live in and another of which is our neighbor. There's a paradox, many associated with that relationship, but I'd like to hold off that discussion if it's at all possible and pick up on any of the others. Russia and Ukraine, the issue of immigration versus population decline, the tensions that exist on a geopolitical level between countries within Europe, Britain and France as an example. So, and even the realm of innovation and the reluctance for organizations to change that are obviously confronted by the fact that their products or their market relationships are deteriorating, and yet they remain the same. This is not a new topic, by the way, for the network. I'm well aware of that, but I'm zeroing in on the number of paradoxes that exist out there, and when they begin to converge, whether or not that constitutes the very crisis that some think and forecast, like David Redmond made reference to. It's not going to be any different. Leaders will continue to be focused on the present, not the future, until we have a crisis. Anybody want to jump in with their hand and challenge that or add to it or move us on to some other topic? Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was just going to say typically we wait for the crisis in democracies.
And
So
that,
I would characterize it among the forms of governance. We generally wait for a crisis before we make decisions big decisions in a democracy. Dictatorships do it differently.
I talked to an MLA in Alberta who became a minister one time, and he said his job was simply to make sure there were no shocks, and that is to make sure that we recognize one of these paradoxes and address it before it becomes a crisis. But you're right, in democracy, theoretically, until the voters, if it's of the government, if it's of the people, for the people, by the people, then theoretically policy gets shaped during an election and executed after that election. That's not seems to be the case. Change is coming so fast that you're making policies on the fly, which may mean that democracy is in trouble because the rate of change and the number of paradoxes that are out there are just becoming so overwhelming that it's only an autocracy and a dictatorship that has the capacity to make its way through a crisis. Go ahead, Aslam.
We can look at creating nimble policy, which means monitoring the situation and adjusting the policy as the situation changes.
And one of those
regulated context.
And one of the ways of monitoring that is with polls and referendums.
Yes.
Interesting enough. And yet people are having a hell of a time when someone initiates a referendum to get a reading so they can then cast influence, having conferred with the population on policy. Go ahead, Aslam.
I think a couple of things. One is that the reason why in democracies we tend not to prevent what we feel can be prevented in the future from a political perspective point of view is the payback is not there for the politicians.
That's absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, to invest the money now and trying to convince you that 5 years things will be better if we do this now, okay, it's a really hard decision. And so, as indicated earlier, it's only when we get kicked in the butt that, do we react. And then, it's like the buffalo jumping over the hill, right? So you build a hospital at the bottom to deal with it rather than preventing the buffalo from running over.
A good example is waiting. I mean, how long is too long before the health system does address the waiting list issue? When does it, quote, become a crisis? When is it right on the edge of a crisis and someone steps in and becomes a hero or a heroine because that issue is now being resolved? How many of these paradoxes are waiting for the crisis to arrive or be right on the cusp of it before stepping in and becoming the hero or heroine for having taken action on it? But there are so many that are evolving. Which one do you take? Go ahead, Barry.
I don't. I'm going to share your comments with for some time now. I think most of you realize I don't think we have a democracy.
Okay.
Anywhere in the world, but we haven't landed anywhere else.
Well, if we don't have a democracy, presumably we have an autocracy, and we should be making decisions and not having to confer with an election to get out of some of the messes that exist today. But they still seem to be prevailing.
Yeah, and I'd sooner see us revert back to a democracy, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, with the number of crises that we seem to be reflecting upon that aren't getting resolved, that is really setting up the evolution of power to the state so it can make decisions on our behalf.
In my opinion, right now, the autocrats are winning.
Yeah, and that may be because these issues continue to percolate. until such time that power is centralized and a decision gets made. And oh, isn't this a good thing that we have Barry Sanders and we have the mayor in New York and we have the Democrats in the US maybe playing the card of centralizing decision making because the populace in the US is swinging away from what has been taking place the last few years. Go ahead, Eric.
I would argue that it's less about democracy and more about the processes and feedback, in the same way that what you were talking about last week, you mentioned responsibility and accountability.
Right.
If your feedback systems are not effective and the decision loop is too long, then we're not getting feedback in an effective manner. We've built our systems for feedback loops that are years and maybe even decades. And it's not like we don't have approaches that allow us to deal in a much more responsive manner. It's just that we're not using them. I was looking at a political party 6 months ago, and I looked at the structure, and they showed me the structure, and I said, well, okay, yeah. If we look at best practices from an organizational perspective, the practices that you are using today are 30 years old. So you can't respond effectively? Well, of course not. We know how to deal with those things better, but we have not made the changes in our processes. So it's not inherently democracy or a problem. I would argue it's a problem with processes and accountability and feedback loops.
Reflecting on the process for a moment, we haven't discussed this, I don't think at any time, but it's maybe worth tabling today. About 20 years ago, it was in the 80s, at an international level, I think led by Thatcher and Reagan, they wanted a small government. And I remember in Alberta, the austerity measure was to gut the public service, to literally pare it down. And thousands, tens of thousands, in fact, were let go. What that did is that eroded another source of input to government, which was the input of the public service. There were concerns that the public service was too influential in shaping policy, and the politicians who were elected to shape policy were upset. But it's conceivable that gutting the public service has taken away from government a voice that may have had the capacity to offer forethought without having to go to the public. Just a thought. Go ahead, Jeff.
After your introduction, I came up with 4 paradoxes.
Okay.
AI could destroy us, but we're developing at breakneck speed.
Right.
Governments are shoving unpopular political decisions down the throats of their voters. For example, according to Troy Media website, the poll is in. Albertans don't want 2-tier healthcare.
Right.
The leadership of the world's greatest democracy is cozying up to dictatorships over other democracies. So Trump is choosing North Korea over South Korea, Russia over Ukraine, etc.
Yeah.
And democracies, as was mentioned earlier, I think unfortunately the electorate isn't well educated enough on most issues to make the decisions that are in their best interest.
Well, and is that due to education? Is it due to the rate of change? Is it due to the complexity? Is it due to information overload? Or is it due to all of that?
I think it's all of that. Basically, I'm an engineer. We're required to keep our engineering proficiency up every year and educate ourselves. But, keeping on top of all of the issues and understanding the issues is basically impossible,
So you walk right into an argument which we've posed before. Thank goodness for the arrival of AI, because AI can absorb so much more information than we as human beings have ever been able to do. All we need to do is begin to learn how to use AI as an aid in critical thinking, and we should be able to make our way through this information overload, or those of us that wish to be in the elite, among
Absolutely.
the elite, like Roger.
I think that's absolutely true. Sorry for the barking dog. But we have to make the decision that we want to use AI in that way. Unfortunately, what we're using it for is creating deep fakes and other things.
Well, okay, but just stop for a moment, because you're absolutely right. But there's a tendency to refer to them. What about you, Jeff? Are you using it? Are you using AI as an aid in terms of decision making in your life?
Again, sorry for the dog. I use it to help me with doing research and perform calculations that otherwise would take me a lot longer to do.
Okay, so anybody else? Let's do a show of hands just for the hell of it. How many of you are using AI today as an aid, either for shopping or business? Maybe I should. Is anybody not using it? Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. So, AI is a tool, and maybe we have a unique group here. I suspect in many ways we do. Um, but AI is an incredible asset. For some of us, it's life-changing. It has the book, and we talked about it ourselves. AI has the capacity to be a civilizational transformer if you buy in. And if you don't, it has a civilizational transformer to shape your future, whether you like it or not. So the book and what we've talked about is the importance of you as an individual taking charge of your life, and AI can be an aid. But you got to know who you are, or it will guide you toward what it has as as foundational values. Kevin, I see you nodding your head, and I know you're just going to sleep now. But anything you want to add here?
Uh, yeah, a couple of things. I think, first of all, back to the democracy thing, there seems to be somewhat of a correlation between the size, the population of a country and the efficacy of the democracy. You could argue that when you look at democracy and freedom and this and that, that perhaps some of the middle powers seem to score higher than the large powers, India, U.S. and whatnot. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that what that correlation is, but I think it comes back to there may be a certain population, and going back in history where when we lived as tribes, there was a sweet spot in terms of what was the ideal size for an effective organization, and it might have been a few hundred people with civilization and with communication, that sweet spot may be in the 10 to 50 million population range, and beyond that, things start to go south. I don't know.
Well, in that regard, a recent interview with Harari, he pointed out to probably one of the more effective democracies in history was Athens, because everybody in Athens could actually go to the forum where the discussion would take place. In democracy, we have representation based on a population base, and you try and have a representative per 200,000 people or whatever the number happens to be. So there is an attempt in democracy to manage that population base so that it isn't so large that you can't listen to what people have to say. That's really not the issue. The issue, however, is when that person gets elected, if they're making independent decisions as opposed to an alignment with the party, we're not necessarily electing someone who is representing us, they're representing the party. And therein lies one of the failures. So maybe the failure isn't a democracy. The failure is the accountability of the party structure to represent the interests of the people as opposed to power for the sake of power.
And I think we've had that conversation a number of times around just the comparison of the British parliamentary system, which we use, which is at best marginally democratic. And I had what I thought was a very clever point to make, and it just leaked
Well,
out.
I'll keep watching your eyes, and if I see
Okay.
your eyes widen, I'll call back on you. Go ahead, Peter. You're muted.
I was just going to just say I got a little note here. In fact, what did I just say? That Athens, as you pointed out, you said everybody in Athens. Well, it was actually just eligible males who were not slaves and citizens of the city.
Well,
And it's on their emblems.
that's good enough for
And
me.
and they were always a vote by hand in public. It was never a ballot.
Okay.
So it was like basically the argument would be like so often in debates that the loudest voice wins.
Switzerland might be the closest to that today.
Yes,
No, I
it's
mean, well, I would think that you might say your municipality is
the ideal one model.
you might say your municipality is the closest that we're to of a party of a form of government that is close to you would be your municipal government, which doesn't have parties, although they're trying to work
Some
around that
do.
now.
Montreal does.
Go ahead, Tommy.
So I think we could have just a quick note. I think we could almost agree that there's almost an inverse relationship between the efficacy of democracy and the population therein.
Well, you're seeing the rezoning, gerrymandering in the U.S., where each party is trying to manipulate the boundaries in their favor,
Yeah.
which is clearly an indication that they believe population base will reflect one value versus another. So, yes. Go ahead, Tommy.
Well, I'm getting back to the question of feedback and feedback to leadership. And out in this complicated world, how can the average citizen keep up with all the information and about their information? Yeah, AI may help, but we do have another supposedly source of expertise, and that is the public service. These people are trained to make decisions and to gather specialized information in individual areas, but how often do these public servants actually get listened to?
Well, this is a point I was making earlier of the gutting of the public sector in the belief that politicians felt that they needed to have influence to be the policymakers, not to be overly influenced by public sector, which was heavily unionized. So, good point. I mean, excellent. That the history of the public service typically has been a trusted public service, aids in decision making because it has the time to research the material as opposed to on the fly. Today, policy seems to be made at the media level. Influence is shaped by polls and shaped by media, and it's mercurial. It changes by the day. And therein lies the dilemma: is we have politicized public policy. It used to be public policy, not political policy, and now the policy is shaped by: are you right? Are you left? What party do you belong to? You'll know what the decision is. And we're seeing that in so many different. I mean, someone made reference to the North Korea. I mean, it is laughable that their Russia is bringing in troops from North Korea because it can't replace its military through losses. And who is Trump's friend? North Korea. And on the other hand, Ukraine asks Trump to be one of the primary supporters for the military. It's a paradox. It doesn't make any sense, and yet both phenomena exist simultaneously. And how do you make sense of that? Unless he's just an entertainer, and that's my conclusion. And be careful to taking him seriously. But you get into a trade war, and there's consequences. What's on your plate may be different than what's on your plate today as a byproduct of a tiff between two nations.
Mm-hmm.
Who haven't I heard? Tom, you have something more to say, or is your hand up and we forgot to bring it down? Okay. Let me see. Who shall I embarrass next? I've done Eric. I've done Kevin. You got your finger up.
Yeah, it's this finger, not this finger.
Yeah, I got you. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to expand on Tommy's point. I think there's great value in terms of civil service, in terms of their knowledge of their own individual domains. But I suspect that there's a culture in the civil service that encourages risk adversity, which obviously then discourages creative thinking. And, that I think that's a problem.
Clearly. Creative thinking, how original. Aslam, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to support that point in the sense that, you indicated earlier that we're politicized. The politics wants to determine the policy. The example that I had was in 2000 in Alberta. Premier Klein had a policy, Bill 11, if you remember correctly, and that was towards privatization. Coincidentally, we have the same bill number today. okay, that's doing the same thing. And the issue there was that when they asked the public servants to provide them with evidence to support their policy, okay, and the public servants actually went to University of Calgary to do the research because it was in Klein's background, hometown. And the evidence came back that yes, there are instances where the private sector is really good, usually on specific items like knee surgeries and so forth, but overwhelmingly in a publicly funded system, private sector is not efficient. Okay. That evidence was provided to Premier Klein, and he fired the whole executive committee of Alberta Health in 2000.
So could you distinguish between efficient and effective? I mean, what efficiency is speed, cost, relevant. Was the public sector analysis of the capability or private based on simply efficiency, or was it based on the right answer?
It was based on effectiveness and cost.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And the research, as I said, was done by the University of Calgary plus the Institute of Economics of Alberta.
And so the conclusion was that the private sector was better at decision making than the public?
No. The private sector was good when it came to single items like knee surgery or eye surgery, because it's a routine thing. But if you happen to get a heart attack while getting knee surgery, you're screwed. Okay. Gotcha. And so the answer back to the premier was, if you want a health system that looks after that total health, then your public system is better. And he turned around and let the whole executive committee of health go. The consequence of that was all government department officials throughout the government stopped providing the unbiased information or the evidence because they didn't want to get fired.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the politicization of the system. I mean, a good public service, and this research comes out of China's history, was people that operated independently of the politics. They were lifelong civil servants. Their job, whether it was an academic or whatever, that was their job, was to provide good advice, regardless of politics. That is not the case. The public service has been gutted, but it's also been heavily politicized. And you're right. Unless you make the right decision for them, you've got to be aligned with public policy.
Yeah, so if you take a look at Singapore, okay, it's exactly the opposite. There, the civil servants are really respected and protected by the government. And
well, I mean, I can recall I worked in the public service as my first area, and it was under the Lougheed era, and it was incredible. We were expected to be free thinkers and to provide good advice, good research, and that research needed to be provided, not based on whether it was politically aligned, but whether it was good research and important. Go ahead, Eric.
I just wanted to circle back with a couple pieces of information on the idea of democracy, whether it's efficient or not efficient, or whether its time has come. If we use willingness to fight for your nation as an indicator of support for that nation, Canada is running, I saw one point where Canada is running at 13% willingness to volunteer for military service versus Finland, which is running at about 80%.
Right.
So both of our countries are basically looking at, these are democratic systems. Okay, so there's got to be a problem on why almost 70% difference between the two countries, right?
Well, you'd probably find that Finland, like Israel, feels threatened, and the population is sympathetic to the fact that under threat, we're a little more nationalistic about defending our nation. Canada may find itself more prone to be pro-military if we continue to have a conflict from the south, but it's a point worth referencing.
That 13% is from this year. So if we feel elbows up versus the United States or whoever, we're basically indicating that that the majority of the population is not satisfied with the outcomes of our government. of our governments. And I would argue it's a process issue.
Or we're not feeling threatened militarily yet.
Mhm.
Anyway, Jeff, your turn.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I would expect that military service in Ukraine probably wasn't really popular before the war, and after the Russians invaded, there was a huge surge in people who joined up and wanted to fight. I think that part of that is that Canadians have lived under an umbrella and have been protected and basically felt no danger from our closest neighbor. And we still realistically don't feel any danger in terms of military invasion. I don't think the US population would support an invasion of Canada. Um, so, in that sense, who are we concerned about? The Russians, at this point, they've got their hands full. So there is no real immediate threat that I can see. Now, if Donald Trump was to make good on his threat to invade Greenland or some such thing, I think we would see a lot of support for the military and potentially people joining in to fight that.
Well, I mean, we are in a less stable global environment than we have been, and as a byproduct of that, and some of the claims or incentives that are being made, Canada is increasing its defense budget significantly. So one way or another, someone is exercising what appears to be either forethought or a reflex reaction by simply today, which has what's been going on for the last 20 years. Nobody felt threatened 20 years ago, but they obviously are feeling threatened now. Now, whether a crisis has emerged, as Redmond says, if Taiwan were to be invaded or encircled, would that constitute the crisis that one might anticipate to draw us into something which we haven't anticipated and probably should have in retrospect? Peter.
I was just going to say, with respect to the Ukraine, when we were speaking of the military strength there of the Ukrainian side, when the war started, the age of entry for the conscript was 27. Then, after the war proceeded for about a year or so, it went down to 25.
Yeah.
And under American pressure, it's now 18. And there's now discussion in Ukraine about conscripting women.
Mm-hmm. And in
So
Russia?
there's a clear sign that there's a lack of human resource to defend the country.
And we saw, 200,000 Russians leave when there was a threat of conscription in Russia. Both parties are feeling it.
And there's also been a lot of defection among the young people who have joined the Ukrainian military.
Sure.
Disillusionment and so on. But there's been a lot of defection. So even though they signed up or were conscripted, they've tried to flee, many.
Well, I think the paradox to me, I mean, I think focusing on the current situation makes sense. But the issue that I raise as a paradox is Russia is a very powerful nation. We believed it had the second most powerful military in the world. And yet Ukraine, it had some industrial capability, has been able to fend them off like a World War I stalemate. That power imbalance was based on military strength and doesn't appear to be the basis, and that's a paradox. So how is it that a nation like Ukraine can hold off Russia? How can Afghanistan hold off the United States? How can Vietnam? How is it that these small nations are able to hold off these militarily superpowers that have trillion-dollar budgets? Does it have to do with nationalism? Does it have to do with personal pride and underestimating? Did Russia underestimate the resilience of the Ukrainian people? It appears to be so. And also the resilience and capacity to be innovative with the emergence of drones. So there are things that a small nation appears to be able to do to handle Goliath. That's a paradox. And the military has been kept caught off guard. If Putin thought that his military had the strength, based on historical assumptions of who wins in a war, he miscalculated. And what did he miss? What is it that the leader in Russia missed in making the decision to invade Ukraine? appears to be
Many
the result of some
militaries have missed the impact of drones. I mean, this is a massive new
Yes.
innovation in
Right.
warfare.
Right. But it wasn't, drones didn't appear on their own. Leaders made a decision.
But
And
they came quickly, like transformative.
yeah. So it's interesting. When you are threatened, you find you can be more creative than you ever imagined. My threat was going on vacation and finding I was real creative and making a lot of decisions I couldn't make before until I was ready to go on vacation. And all of a sudden, it became really easy to make decisions. I always found that a little odd and why I told my staff to go on vacations frequently. Bill Jones, your turn.
Yes, we
Aslam got it. He's laughing. Go ahead, Bill.
we have to be very careful.
A little louder, Bill. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. We have to be very careful about the expression of state power. You raised Vietnam and Ukraine. Both the United States and Russia have been very cautious of exerting their maximum power on the small state. They've been very restrained. Both.
I didn't see a lot of that restraint in Vietnam with orange on the forests and with the bombing of Hanoi.
They could have leveled Hanoi. They could have leveled North Vietnam.
So you think the reason they lost was they didn't exercise enough strength?
No, I'm not saying that they can't. No, I'm not making that description.
I mean, they could have. Goldwater was of the view they should have nuked them.
Yes.
And he didn't win the election, but he felt they should nuke them.
Exactly. There's a restraint of power, and we must recognize that both in U.S. and Vietnam and Russia and Ukraine. There's a restraint of power, not its exercise. So there's no wish from Putin to level Ukraine. They see them as kin, cousins, and so they're not. This is not a extinction level event for the Russians.
So why are they there?
Yep, go ahead.
Why are they there?
They are there for their own purposes within the extent of the Ukrainian issue with the Donbass and the Russians on the eastern side of Ukraine versus non-Russians on the west. So yeah, I'm not going to get into the political motivations of either side. I am just stating that do not misinterpret Russian restraint with their inability to bring Ukraine into rubble.
Well, they've got nuclear. Clearly restraint might have global consequences if they become unrestrained.
Exactly. So,
and is NATO and the United States being restrained as well?
They have. It's a very interesting thing. NATO has no fight in this. There's.
Well, Poland does.
It's not part of NATO. They are imposing themselves within the conflict, and I could go into a lot of the intricacies of the geopolitics of all of this, and I'm not going to do that now.
Okay. Well, the topic was the paradox.
Yes, the paradox is one that has overwhelming strength, is being internally restrained. So do not think Russia is weak. This is the mistake the West is making, that Russia hasn't conquered Ukraine in 5 days. And excellent example is Afghanistan and Iraq. The United States, they lost. United States could have wiped out Afghanistan in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. It is the measure of restraint of a superpower in its exercise of that power that needs to be acknowledged, not its inability to control a minor power. When there's a tipping point on whether you are going to lose a small war or you're going to obliterate a population, thank God the people who are in that position say, all right, we're willing to lose to a smaller power.
So do you think that should be considered before they get involved in the first place?
I wish it was. No one enters a war. When you enter a war, you always think you're going to win. Take a look at the Iranian issue. I mean, no doubt the American situation thought they could bomb them into submission, but the Iranians show that they are resilient. And the resilient isn't without tremendous cost. But the Americans have reached a point where they've hammered Iran to a point of, wherever they sit right now, which is teetering on economic collapse. But the point to move them to complete submission requires far more military power, including tactical nukes, etc. And thank goodness the Americans go, yeah, we can't do it.
Okay, well, let's use that. I mean, you've made the point, I mean, my thick head gets it. Let's turn now. We've got 15 more minutes to the relationship between the United States and Canada. The United States has made some declarations. It's followed through on them, and Canada is responding. So we've got a David and Goliath dilemma here. It's a paradox. Up until recently, we had a very friendly relationship that we didn't pay much attention to other than on issues of trade. We had an undefended border. We've never had a military conflict. Even the War of 1812 was a minor skirmish on a world scale. So all of a sudden we have conflict. Are both parties exercising restraint? It would appear to be so. Canada isn't exercising its oil card, its energy card of hydroelectric and oil, and the United States isn't exercising military invasion. So we've got restraint on both parties. Appears to me we've got a lot of theater going on until such time as they come up with an agreement and both claim victory for their side. Eric, do you want to enter into this one, or was there another point you really wanted to make? I think with 15 minutes, I really wanted to get into this U.S. Canada tiff, but I'll hear you out, Eric. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out a couple books that bring a bunch of this together. The Unrestricted Warfare from China, two Chinese colonels out of 1999, forms a lot of the basis for hybrid and overt conflict. The dragons and the snakes, how the West learned to fight the West, which is like maybe 10 years old. That's from an Australian writer. And he talks about how smaller state and non-state actors can actually fight against a larger adversary. And a lot of that is because of changes in technology on how hard you can hit with stuff. So things like drones and stuff like that, its implications, all of these implications have been coming out of a bunch of the stuff the Chinese put forward and said, yeah, we're going to do it this way, and this is our policy. The second one, and then there was a third one. Oh, and the last one, which is a new book, Reconceptualizing War, really talks about conflict. Now, he's focused on war, but I think it goes to other conflict too. And it goes into our bias, a Western European bias on how we think conflict happens. And people tend to focus on what they're used to. The world has gotten wider, and a lot of other different perspectives has focused in. And he's trying to say, yes, we need to look at all these perspectives and understand what the other opponent or what your adversary is doing. That same story comes back to whether it's economic warfare, like the Canadian-US issues. We have smaller issues. If we understood and looked at the levers and the conflict better in a more analytical method and understood it a bit better, I think we'd be able to respond better. And that's the reasons why I bring up a bunch of those books.
You picked up on a good point. I'm going to come back to Bill. Bill will see where I'm going with this. So I'm going to ask Bill to respond to a point I'm going to make. We discussed this almost a year ago, that what was going on in the U.S., and it now appears to be evident, was Fortress America. That what the U.S. was doing with the world at large was a byproduct of its growing debt and its inability to defend the oceans on a world scale and be the world's policeman in order to address geopolitical conflict and to enable the ocean to continue to be a safe trading platform. We now have the U.S. backing off. The U.S. seems to be in a protectionist state. It's saying to Canada, get on board and help us and become Fortress North America, or you're an outlier. This was Bill's position. Mine was Fortress North America. Why can't we play? Why can't we play in the same sandbox? But we seem to be seeing the U.S.-Canada relationship playing out. That if you're not going to play ball with us, you're either with us or against us, and that's a protectionist mentality, and it's playing out in the trade war. So how does Canada go to the United States and say, look, we've got to work this out together? How does Canada have to get on its knees? Does the U.S. have to what does it take for two nations to sit down and say, let's be rational? Do they have to have a public fight before they go quietly for counseling and have a diplomat say that there's a way out of this? Haley, you've got your hand up. I'm going to call on you.
You're on mute.
You're muted
You're on
still.
mute, Haley.
I can see you're getting ready.
Yeah.
All guns a blazing.
I was just muting so the steam sound wasn't audible. 2 weeks from now, we'll have the 25th anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
And if you recall, this is a quarter century ago. If you recall, there was an evaluation done by the Department of Defense, and one of the indictments was a failure of imagination. It's a quarter century ago. No one could imagine that scenario happening. Nothing's changed except the continuity of this democratic system to still not allow creativity. We talk about creativity, and as an automatic default, we think of something else than what it really is. And what creativity really is the antithesis to certainty. And when I'm looking at what you're talking about with the systems, and we have crisis situations which can develop 20, 50 years in, and a political environment that you have to superimpose a time structure on that exists, it's incentivized for 4 or 5 year cycles. It can't possibly jive. So you'd need to intentionally create something that could survive before the crisis happens. So the alternatives have to be in place before the crisis makes them unavoidable. And when Bill talked about, well, we made that mistake. Yeah, he's exactly right. And it's exactly what the general said in the US 25 years ago. It's a failure of imagination.
Okay,
and
so let's put imagination on the table. I will point to a moment of imagination, and I'm going to ask you to respond to it. At a dinner party in Florida at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump turned to Justin Trudeau and he said, 51st state. That's imagination. Mm-hmm. That would resolve the problem. That would bring us, we'd have North American trade, we have a common defense system, all of the issues that we have with the United would be resolved. 51st state. That's creative. In fact, maybe we should have 13 provinces, two provinces each. Maybe we have 26 seats in the Senate. Actually, we have 48 because you get two, blah, blah, blah. So that's creative. It opened up a whole bunch of discussions. It opened up a whole bunch of things that have been unresolved. It's addressed interprovincial trade, uniform military response. There's been so many things on the table that were left unaddressed for ages. So a creative response by the President of the United States has triggered a whole bunch of discussions that were overdue. Is that what you mean?
That's an interesting example, sure. And democracy depends on our willingness to question these assumptions and tolerate ambiguity. And what happened when somebody imagination and creativity isn't infallible. It's just an acceptance of risk. That's all. It's just allowing a little bit of risk instead of having decisions having to be made on 100% certainty of an outcome that we want. And sometimes you have to just do the right thing. And you've been seeing my battle with the organ. It's not dependent on a risk assessment or this or that. It's the future. And sometimes just doing the right thing doesn't mean that you have to see the precedent. You do have to imagine alternatives. It doesn't mean there aren't bad ideas. But if we hang on, Perry, hang on. Because what happened when somebody comes up with an outrageous idea, instead of clutching our pearls and saying, my God, you offended me, why not just say, okay, well, what does that actually look like? Carrying it through as a kindergarten teacher would, and perhaps in this instance, that's what was required. Let's carry it through to the end and see, is that a good outcome? Is that something that might work? No. Is it shitty? Yup. And then we can dispose of it instead of making it a battle of egos and somebody's offended. Tell me that's not what 100% of the wars right now are about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the politics of win-lose. Mm-hmm. Is when politician says, I've got to win votes, therefore I'm going to win, I got to push you down, I got to make you look like the bad guy. We can't acknowledge that there's an issue here. We ought to resolve it diplomatically. But go ahead. Eric, you had your hand up? No? Okay. Haley, that was very timely, because you're absolutely right. Where is the moderate voice with an argument going on between parties? Where is that moderate voice that says, sanity has to prevail? Let's look for the creative solution. Let's look for the win-win. Instead, we look for the win-lose. And in this trade debate, someone's going to stand up and say, I won. Both parties have to feel they've got an exit ramp and they've got to win. Same with Iran. Same with all these other issues that we've laid on the table. They've all become win-lose, and it results in a stalemate.
Mainland Chinese.
We are in a stalemate on so many different fronts.
Mainland Chinese do not believe in win-win. It's all win-lose.
Say that once again. Make sure I understand. Were you saying the Chinese philosophy is win-lose?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mainland Chinese, not the Taiwanese, but mainland Chinese. Yeah. You can't have win-win. They don't believe it exists.
I suspect with what we're seeing today in the United States is it's similar, but it appears to be justifiable if in fact their ultimate position is they are in trouble with their debt, that they've got to pull back, and in order to prevent them from losing. And so many of the positions that they're taking appear to be from a position of declining strength, and it's acknowledged. Now, Bill, you want to jump in here if you are. I've been sort of articulating a position that you and I have discussed publicly when we did the sovereignty discussions in Calgary and Edmonton, which was the relevance of Fortress America possibly being converted to Fortress North America. What's the status of that thinking?
Well, the status of the thinking is it has, Perry, as I related to you personally, is we recognized this development at its infancy, and we logically, through you and I debating over many seances with others, of course, about this, has adaptively become the policy that is operating within the continent. The question now is Canada going to participate or resist? And of course, my position is if you resist, it will be disastrous. And if you participate, you can define. And unfortunately right now, given typical political responses, you kick me, I kick you, and not understanding what the actual motivation of the first kick happens to be, is coming to fruit. Now, to thankfully, Premier Smith has recognized the difference between capacity to injure and the advent of trust. our ability to supply energy to the United States is based on reliability and trust. And she's very, very and appropriately unwilling to utilize and break that trust to make a political point. Trust has been built over 75 years of interaction between Alberta and the United States. She's unwilling to throw that away for a mere political point. And good for her, and I hope she holds her ground. That's one of the ways that we can recover our relationship with the United States, is no matter what the angst between us, that our trust and ability to perform contractual contracts with the United States on delivery of energy is without dispute.
Well, that's interesting, because that brings up the point that you made earlier, that Canada is showing restraint.
Well, Alberta is showing restraint. My goodness.
I put tongue in cheek there.
Kenny's not showing restraint. Netche is not showing restraint. Notley is not showing restraint. Jason Henry is not.
Ford isn't showing restraint, but Carney hasn't acknowledged that this is a position we need to take. So presumably he is the spokesman for Canada right now. Well, Canada is showing restraint.
Well, yeah, I think he's smarter than an average duck, that's for sure. Well, but boy, I'll tell you, a lot of political power is organizing around it. I mean, can you imagine a coalition between Notley and Jason Kenney? I can't imagine.
Yeah, I know. I saw that recently.
What a disaster.
Yeah. Well, it is a bewitching hour. It's 5:30. I will do one more circle. If anybody feels that there's a point they'd like to make that maybe hasn't been raised today, this was very rich, so you didn't disappoint me at all. We are going to continue to extend the reach, even though this is a small network that we have that comes together each week. The richness, and there are many people that look at we get over 1,000 looks after these webinars on our YouTube, so we are being watched. But I'm delighted with you that show up each week, and I encourage you to bring your friends along. But these discussions continue to amaze me as how wide-ranging and deep thinking the discussions have been. So I'm delighted with your presence. I'm delighted with the fact that you show up each week and we can have fun together. So I don't think we have to have power. I think that just the sheer initiative of having a rich discussion without judgment is adequate. Certainly satisfies me, and I hope the fact you keep on coming back is an indication that satisfies you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Not saying anything really new, just sort of articulating it in a little bit of a different way. And, emotion can often overwhelm reason and logic, especially in political debates. And as we all identify with our own tribes, be it as Canadians versus Americans identifying with Americans, that identification colors our arguments and our receptivity to embracing perspectives that don't sync with our own tribal biases. And just a comment on our particular little group here, I think we do a tremendous job of embracing diverse arguments, and how do we get that message across that, it's a really good idea to exercise meaningful listening skills to folks that offer diverse and perhaps almost very different perspectives. So I just wanted to put that out there, and it's something that I think we have done in this group, and but we also need to carry it forth from we even looking at this trade war. We invariably take the Canadian perspective because that's our tribe. But I, for example, saw an interesting little YouTube thing today on interviewing a CBC interview of the Trade Commission, U.S. Trade Commissioner, who made some statements that what Carney was saying was in terms of his rationale for shutting down the talks was not necessarily correct from his perspective. And so I think, we have to be able to sit back and say, well, maybe our side wasn't completely right. Maybe it's not a black and white issue.
We make decisions based on information, and we may often misinterpret that information.
Mm-hmm.
And the power of dialogue and the power of, quote, the commons, and this is a form of the commons and the importance of the book that we put together. I mean, it may have my authorship, but the reality was 1,000 people have expressed their voices with me over the last 20 years. That voice was the importance of listening to one another.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into a crisis, such as you might portray what's going on between the US and Canada, it's critical that we listen. It's not critical that we talk. Some people talk quickly. I mean, I think Ford maybe fits into that category. But listening becomes very important because being informed is only the beginning of doing a proper interpretation and then deciding how to act. And whether you're acting in win-lose, which is purely political, or you're acting in win-win, which is to come up with a solution that has long-term implications, not just short-term. That's what Trump did in his first CUSMA agreement, is they thought long-term. We seem to be in a very short-term perspective, and that would imply there's something going on in the U.S. that is urgent, and I think it's debt. That's Bill's perspective. He may be right, he may be wrong, but he has interpreted a lot of behavior that the United States is in trouble. And a lot of the behavior that we're seeing is a reflection of them being in trouble and therefore attempting to defend themselves and trying to bring Canada into the fold rather than pushing it away. Well, we're going to have to see how these negotiations proceed. We need to be careful not to ourselves be reflexive on what happens each day. These negotiations are just underway. The entertainment phase, we're in it right now. I want to see what this looks like a month from now. I want to see what our referendum looks like and what power it gives to our premier to have influence. She will have more influence based on what comes out of that referendum because she can say, I have conferred with the people. What they have to say is another matter. But we'll be watching. So, Randall, let's call it a wrap. And keep the party going for those that are interested for maybe another 20 minutes.